Hi.
Welcome to another episode of the Blank Canvas, a project brought to you by Plinko Solutions, focused on AI and accessibility and building real-time business infrastructure. Today's a really interesting one. I keep saying that with each one, so let's dive into it. Today, we're going to be diving a bit into this design framework, specifically focused on the ideal customer profile. I've been ideating on this a good amount in terms of on the public front, and I've been grateful for the resources kind of pouring back into me to make sense of this. Um, I'll give you guys kind of the context for this. For the past bundle of months, mostly realistically in the last 2 months, I've been getting a lot of volume, a lot of projects done, a lot of great, progress done. And progress being a perception of like actual, just like busy, like projects getting done, meetings are happening, schedules filled, great movement, right? In the last month, I think I cleared between like 39 or 49 projects across 3 different clients, totaled me around like 3,200 USD. Not bad, but in order to build and actually have something going, designing a real like enterprise tier, high grade quality approach to actually doing outreach and then having it come back in requires kind of these few seeds. So for today, we'll be talking a lot in terms of strategic decision making, and just kind of showcasing the thought process behind that. And in the second half, I will do a live build of an actual browser agent based project, which, if you've been following the Blank Canvas, is the world has all the answers, which is an exciting marketing mobile project that basically allows you to turn your notebooks into resources for language models. So before diving into that, let's talk about this. So the ideal customer profile really stems from a few places. In order to best define it, we have to realize a lot of the conversation is hypothetical. So for the next 10 to 15-ish minutes, we're going to stay a bit in terms of the hypothetical. Typically, the thought process to kind of distill this and make sense of it is look at who we know, how well do we know them, and what do we know about them. So being able to segment and extrapolate that information in real time. So for our case and purposes, the wide net that I casted was for service-based businesses, overwhelmed managers, founders, people that are looking to basically integrate AI into their day-to-day lives. Specifically, in terms of my target, the overwhelmed ones that are working 12 to 15 hours and, already tired and exhausted and don't have the time to learn new tools or new software or have to pay a crazy fee in order to do so. So from there, I've been able to kind of segment by the role, the industry, the size, the kind of total addressable market, and ask real big questions about, who am I actually servicing? If I was in a different service-based business that was more vertical, for example, I have a real estate license. So in that case, I would be reaching out to prospective tenants, people that are either looking to move or really, participate in the real estate market. It's still not necessarily the most narrow primary ICP, but it's definitely a more narrow net than this one. So for each ICP, ideal customer profile, we're asking who is the actual buyer, right? Is it an individual or is it a team, right? How is it kind of scaffold? How do they make those decisions, right? So how do they actually approach the decision-making tree, if that would be, in terms of why they would commit or make a purchase? And we'll dive into a bit more about that in the next little bit. What value what are you trying to create for them? And what are they looking for, in terms of a pain point to kind of bridge? If they are, if their sink is broken, they're trying to get you to solve that. In technical solutions, it's a bit more general because it's now a novel landscape. For example, pitched a voice agent project to a real estate firm. After, I want to say, 2 demos, they pretty much were like, we're good. We have VAs that are bringing in deals and like that's working for them. So they decided to just stick to the process they have. No problem with that, but they very much underestimated the value of having AI assist them in both their inbound and their outbound process. Um, but that piece draws on business context, right? How well and how technical can we get the quality of those systems? It's not a one and done thing. If you know anything about voice agents, they are constant work in progress. And that's kind of the nature of it too, right? So being able to do so without contributing to enshittification, trash on the market, as you would say, right? Those spam callers, like good voice agents don't sound like robotic, I don't want to say they don't sound like voice agents because, of course, like AI will sound like AI, but you do want it to feel a bit more conversational. You want it to feel like I didn't have to wait 3 hours for this problem of mine. It's very simple to be solved. But right now, for example, a lot of people will wait on, for example, I just had a friend I had dinner with, and for an hour and a half, he was on the line with the bank because of just acrobatics at the end of the day, right? So having AI to help with that would be really cool. The next component of that, when it comes to the decision-making piece, there's 3 hats that kind of falls under. And I'm still as well, I should mention, by no means an expert at this. I myself am making sense of this, and I'm doing so very much at lifetime. So the 3 hats it falls under: business leadership, functional management, and then technical implementation. What do those 3 mean? Business leadership mainly focuses on the strategic value, meaning the long-term actual effects of implementing these solutions. If it's an email system that automatically reaches out to Facebook leads that just respond to a listing or an ad or something like that, instead of them sitting in that inbox, if you actually engage with them by using AI to not just mass spam back out, but to contextualize, segment, score those leads, bring it into an actual sales system that runs the analytics to assess the risk appetite, the market positioning. How does this exist in relation to others? And the return on investment that we actually get. So by this dollar amount will then give me what in terms of a change story, in terms of an experience before and after. That's a lot of the leadership decision. That's a lot of the stuff that seems very heady. But if you are in a strategic decision-making position, whether you are a solo founder or somebody who's just wearing multiple hats, as most companies do, you think about these things. And if you don't, they tend to bite. So how do we play against that bite without that? That was wild phrasing. How do we basically position ourselves for success in that world? Functional management looks at our short-term department goals. Like, what are we actually focused on for the next 4 to 6 months? So being able to actually align on those short-term goals is really where the magic is. What does this quarter look like? What does this month look like? What does this week look like? Those are all department-focused goals. And the only way you actually ever make sense of them, if like this translates across life and business, fitness, for example, performance metrics. How well did you do? How well did you do last week? How'd you do the week before that? Okay, cool. So this month you made this much progress, right? Often, most progress happens on that kind of scale, month by month, or even week by week. Very rarely is progress perceptively there within day-to-days. And most of us, if you are human, our short-term memory gets reset every time we go to sleep. So the proxy of that means we don't know, like, however we did yesterday, or however you feel you did today, that will disappear by tomorrow, right? However you feel you did yesterday will be gone for the most part by today. How you think you're going to do tomorrow is not going to exist tomorrow. Really, it's just the circumstances, the actual constraints of the moments, the operational happenings that affect how you feel in those given moments. So without getting too philosophical on it, we then, in terms of the functional management, have to take that into consideration, as well as our budget and resources. What do we have access to in terms of capital, social capital, financial capital, right? In terms of network effects, in terms of access to people. How well can I DM somebody or call them and get in touch with them and build and come across in a way that, not even just come across, because I feel like that's to extrapolate it, being able to connect to people meaningfully and contribute more and have that underlying intent to be the person to say, hey, I want to be as helpful as possible and I want to build with you, and really mean that, like care about the people that you're trying to help, right? And sell to. Because sell to or sell with and build with are two different things. So let me frame that again. Selling to somebody and selling with them, right? Selling should be uncovering value, uncovering that this is how useful this is to you because it changes things for you. If you're in fitness, what you are buying is not just access to a gym, but access to a culture, access to the people within it, right? Or even for some people, it's the resources. So those are your budgets and resources, right? With that kind of taken into account, the next piece to look at is specifically the technical solution. So how well can we implement these things, right? How well can we take into consideration what capacities and capabilities come with this new implementation, right? When we have AI now with the speed to lead aspect to it, which really is the number one anchor for any AI sales system, is when people want something solved, that urgency disappears, right? That the moment that people want something to be solved, they would like that solution to reach them as fast as possible. In order for that to happen, there has to be infrastructure and design to actually meet them where they're at, and not just respond with a generic email that they cast aside to the rest of their inbox because they expect it coming. They rather receive something and be like, okay, now this is my next step of engagement. This is my next step in terms of what I have to do. And what I have to do is a question of integration and technical debt. Technical debt is how well do I understand what I need to do next, right? If I just got to open a software and my onboarding, takes me through what I need to do, that's great. If it's just like a chat GPT or Claude or something, then let's just pick it up and find out. Like just, keep beating the machine and plugging in the buttons and maybe we'll get somewhere. Difference. And I think a large piece between, wearing all these hats together really comes from marrying that difference. And there's a lot of magic to doing that in a product. So that's a lot about product. Let's talk about the actual, where does this exist within like outreach in the business and like what we're doing. Communication, when it comes to well-designed organization, follows the three hats, right? There's a leadership layer, there's the functional management layer, and then there's the actual technical layer, the people that are doing it, the piece that is organizing it, and the piece that is deciding how to organize it, right? So a large part for kind of how we can talk to each layer, and this is contextual and something, again, like I mentioned, no expert, but I'm learning in the process of being able to frame the strategy and squaring the risk to reward ratio. This was phrased really well by the same consultant that put me onto this. And he's an absolute genius with it because the framing of squaring risk and reward in communication happens all the time. Even as I mentioned the fitness example, let's go with the finance example, right? Why should I purchase this thing? Well, the risk in this kind of case would then be, what if it doesn't work? What if like I feel that I am the limit? What if like for fitness people, the risk to signing up to a fitness program is that they may not embody the program and then it will affect the way they feel about themselves. So then they dislike and they have that kind of, experience of disdain. In the example of reward, somebody will go through that same fitness program and will be transformed, will be different. They'll feel healthier. With finance, you make the purchase and you're like, wow, my life, I can't imagine my world without this. Very much how I felt when I first, started using GPT and some other tools as well. And realizing that joy, if you are a chef, if you cook, imagine trying to cook. Your risk to reward ratio, you're assessing that at every step of the way. And it often leads to a gambit of probability. So being able to do that within the context of market positioning and long-term return on investment requires you to have understanding of that larger context. And that's something I'm personally becoming more associated and more, when I say associated, more aware of and more driven to understand. It's good to note that the trigger, in this case, trigger being this kind of like impetus, if you will, impetus being basically a reason for doing something, right? A stimulus that moves you to do something, in a sense. For them, leadership is associated with growth, survival, competition, right? Where does this take me? Where does this keep me from ending up? And how far can this make me relative to other people that may or may not be doing this, right? So that's where the market position kind of comes in. And drawing that line is, it's helpful to have these frameworks to do that in conversation, right? Because then you could talk to somebody at a leadership level and know that they care about these things, right? At least if they're good, if they're reasonable leadership. If you're a leadership position and you're not worried about growth, survival, or competition, you're at risk. And the reward for you being aware and actually evolving and growing on these things, developing on these things rather, is really associated to that long-term return on investment. So see how you can kind of connect the dots and draw the lines and use your imagination for that. The management layer is really fascinating because functionally, this is what we experience on a day-to-day basis. We're constantly dealing with efficiency and performance, right? Cooking is the best example of that. You know, how efficiently can you make chicken without making it rubbery, right? And how well can you do that? 10 times out of 10. How well can you, in terms of conversation, meet somebody where they're at, have a meaningful like mirror and label? Consultative sales, when we really look at it, and the framework of consulting specifically, if you yourself have not been an independent consultant for some time, you probably don't recognize what is happening in consultative sales. Within consulting, every conversation is basically, how can I build and help this person in a way that meets all of my expectations in terms of commitment and resources? So for me, sitting down across somebody, and if you've met me personally, you know this, like pen and pad is my lifestyle. Like I will, in terms of being able to approach people and help them, start every conversation with pen and pad, because I'm looking at how can I ground this in frameworks that I can then mirror to them, anchor it in terms of the conversation, and then label it for them so they can then illustrate it and make sense of it and then actually use it to build. So that's the fun part of being a consultant. And consultative sales should be fun. All this stuff in terms of taking it serious is like, it's fascinating. I'm learning to do that less and less because that's a real-time constraint. And when we talk about constraints, specifically strategic constraints, if I'm approaching these conversations as serious can be, then people have to mirror that. They have to basically come to me with that same tone of seriousness. And truthfully, it's hard to be serious for a long period of time. It's less fun. You see me kind of like lightening up and like enjoying the process of being able to illustrate these things. That's what consultative sales should feel like. You should feel like you're actually helping somebody by taking what they're saying, taking notes, listening, right? Listening, and then anchoring the conversation, talking about it, putting words to it, giving it life and story by mirroring it to somebody and anchoring it. Then using that context, that conversation, to then apply frameworks that you have in your tool belt that you've collected over your time. And by being a curious, studious student, you're actually picking these things up. Studious student. Being able to identify those frameworks, put a name to it, and then show them how we can drive that towards process, right? Process is being able to say, okay, so this is what's happening. Here's what we need to do. Here's where we need to go. And being able to identify that then gives you an idea of workload. What does it take if I do this framework, right? If I fix this problem for somebody and I do that 100 times, what does that look like every time? That's how you scope. That's how you get an accurate assessment of workload. That's how you make your sense of what needs to be done in order to achieve this task. GPT and AI can help you put language to that. But in order for you to assess time and that whole relational experience to it, you just have to do it. And do it once. Take 3 weeks to do a 2-hour project. No problem. Reason being, those 3 weeks are going to pass anyways. And if you were going to build and you were going to do consultative sales for a business and a lifestyle that will actually help you and impact people, look towards wrapping task in time, right? Because that becomes process. Process is purely just a matter of process over time. That's it. And when people ask you, how long does this thing take to actually do? You can say it's around this ballpark, right? And being able to do that is really powerful, right? So with that in your contextual awareness, you'll notice I went a bit deeper because of my background in management. That allows you to be like, okay, so this is happening. This is working. This is great. Where does any of this matter, right? What matters, right? That's your strategic constraint, right? That's what you need to pay attention to. The more you're grounded in that, you start to realize something, that you're now closer to implementation reality. You're closer to the engineers. You're closer to the people that are actually building and doing things day by day, because you yourself are one of them, right? Managers that are exceptionally well, I'll go big screen for this. The best owners are also operators. The owner-operator methodology of being able to say, hey, I am owning the operations of these things happening. I'm responsible directly for 3 people having a well understanding of task, goal, and orientation. And they know what they need to do and they know why. And they're motivated to do so. And I have faith in their impetus and reason for doing so, because they've shown me they understand why they're doing what they're doing. The only way they can show me that is if I ask, not even just ask them, but if I confirm that with my direct intention to manage. Why manage? Philosophical, but bear with me. The ability to extrapolate and go higher up in the decision-making tree is directly proportional to what you can mentally do with your resources. Meaning, it takes greater skill to delegate and do what I just said authentically and well, effectively, is actually scope accurately, approach all things with the awareness of how other people are. I'll say all things because grandiose, but approach things with the care of what that person thinks when it comes to a task that you yourself are owning. When I say owning, it means taking responsibility and ownership of when it comes to the implementation. I should mention, there's a fine line. You cannot do this with everything. This is purely for work. If you are in the habit of doing this, that also means you like to control things in your life and you like to have your routines, your calendar, your schedule, your life, all things predictable. Believe me, I'm a habit of the same way. Life in its most natural states will pull you out of that, right? Because of that, maintenance is a real piece, right? People that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis are like, okay, you're telling me I need to manage more, right? And that's not just in business. It's like you do it to an extent within your life as well, right? Manage your health, your finances, your business, your religion, your relationships, manage your relationships, and there's a whole thread on that. But being able to actually say, how can I bring this into life, right? And doing so in a way, especially when it comes to the business realm, specifically when you have to take into account, okay, there's processes beyond my awareness that are making these events happen, right? So for example, if you work in any logistics firm, right, and you were on the assembly belt, right? Like I was an Amazon warehouse worker once. It's one of my first jobs. You are basically spending your time on implementation. You're spending your time on putting this thing into the box and then passing it along for someone else to make decisions on what they need to do with it, right? So you're delegating. You're putting ownership of the thing later. Rightfully so. There's a large number of people that can serve this, but very few people that can make decisions. Well, fewer people, not very few. There's billions of people on Earth, but there's fewer people that understand scalability. What is scalability? Scalability is how well you can assess growth in real time. That requires you to have an understanding of efficiency, performance, like everything else pretty much in terms of like, how does this affect things? Again, extrapolative takes some time, and a big piece of it is rooted in practicality. So a lot of what I was speaking about it passionately because these are things I've said many times over, but being able to put it into these frameworks is really great. And I'm really grateful for being able to actually just illustrating it. Taking into account what we're basically attacking is this enlightenment gap risk, which is an information gap. How you're basically trying to assess how well does the person I'm speaking to understand and show me in terms of their understanding, right? How well are they actually, on the same page as me? And that really roots in how well you can anchor, mirror things, and like handle conversation while still being, I guess authentic, being a good guy, whatever that means to you. The idea is if you kind of, overlook, or you get, for example, overwhelmed in certain moments, and you don't take into consideration, and you're just like surprised that like these things are happening, and like you're so wrapped up in the narrative of now, and like that can distract you from being able to pull these frameworks into reality, and to take the moment, sit back, listen, just listen with a pen and pad. And the more you can do that, the more things just start to make sense. So with that being said, stop. So join us in the next one. We'll walk through a live build with Browser Agent, building that mobile app. Really excited for that. So see you guys in the next one.